I'm your host, Katinka Blackford Newman, and welcome to the Medfree Mental Fitness Podcast. This week, I'm joined by best-selling author and mental health ambassador, Rachel Kelly. Her books include Black Rainbow, about her experience of depression, and 4 subsequent books about her recovery and how to stay calm and well. Rachel is also an official ambassador for Rethink Mental Illness, Head Talks, Sane, and the Counselling Foundation. And she's also written another book, which we're going to be talking about later on in this podcast. I should also say that actually Rachel is an old friend of mine and that we go back a long way. Isn't that right, Rachel?
Yes, I think it must have been a teenage party. We were probably both it was certainly university or certainly our early life anyway that we first became friends.
Yes, I think I was always slightly in awe of you because I knew you as this super successful, high-flying, younger Rachel. How did it begin, your mental health crises?
So I'm in my early 30s. I'm working in the newsroom at the Times. My husband, who's still my husband, was working in financial services. So he was working long hours, quite a stressful job. And in addition, we had 2 small children. And what happened was that one night I couldn't get to sleep. But this insomnia was rather different because with it came some quite alarming physical symptoms. I started to feel very nauseous. My heart rate speeded up. I remember having a very alarming symptom of holding onto the bed like I was going to fall. And my mind was absolutely racing with these sort of catastrophic thoughts. So, if I don't get sleep, I won't be able to get up. I won't be able to cope. I won't be able to go to work. My life would unravel very quickly. I would lose my job. We'd lose the mortgage. We'd lose the house. Children go into care. Basically, this ran for a couple of days. And then next thing I knew, I was talking to a psychiatrist. And the first thing he did was give me sleeping pills. I didn't get any better. All these symptoms was getting worse and worse. I started taking a whole lot of medication, antidepressants, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, a kind of huge cocktail of different things. And it was a kind of blackout for about 3 months.
Were you in hospital for 3 months?
No, I was only there really briefly. What happened was I got much worse when I went in because I found it very alien, very frightening. Nurses would come in through the night and everything was taken away from you in case you take your own life. I was lucky. My husband said, look, it's okay. She can come home. I was taking an old version of antidepressants called preventative, and it left a horrible metallic taste in the mouth. I'd take the drugs, I'd be knocked out for a few hours, then I'd wake up and I'd start screaming and saying, I want to die, I can't go on. I feel so ill.
Sounds so painful. So painful.
Yeah, it was a very frightening time. I just kept saying, when will I be better? When will I be better? Will the drugs make me better? Will the drugs make me better? I had terrible side effects of the drugs. I absolutely ballooned in weight, and that was very demoralizing. Having said that, I didn't care at the time. I was so ill, I thought, well, it was worth it.
And so how long did that first episode take for you to recover from the first episode? And did you manage to come off all the meds before the second episode happened?
It wasn't like one day you wake up and you're better. I remember someone likening it to the sort of outline of cliffs that, you get to one peak, you drop back down, but you don't drop back down quite so low. And then you do the next peak and you drop back down. And then gradually it becomes less jagged and evens out. It was around 6 months. I went back to work feeling quite wobbly, but not obviously to the extreme. And then the sort of path easing out. And then there was the whole battle of coming off the drugs.
What was the impact of all of this on your family?
I had 5 children. I worried a lot about the impact on the children because I was out of action for such a long time. I remember our second boy, George, I didn't pick him up from school for a year. And he was given this prize for bravery because I hadn't been there on the school run for a year. Even now, that makes me feel quite emotional. So it's a really high cost. And I suppose the upside is it then completely defined my life subsequently. What could I have done differently? What could I do differently now? How could I support other people? How can we figure this stuff out together?
What was the narrative that was given to you at the time about your illness? Because I remember I was told that I had a chemical imbalance, that these drugs were going to fix somehow. Was that what you were told?
The first time I was ill, it was in my 30s, so it was best part of 20 years ago. So there was still the serotonin narrative, this idea that I didn't have enough serotonin, and this kind of diagnosis that it was a severe depressive episode. Something wrong with my brain.
So what's your view now of that narrative that you had a chemical imbalance?
Well, I think I've been much more skeptical in the sense that I think all the research I've looked at, I would say that the certainty is we know extremely little about the brain, really incredibly little. It's very hard to know exactly what goes on when you're in that sort of crisis. I think for me, a really big part of recovery and being calm is a feeling of agency and empowerment. The problem I had once you're in the medical model is that you become extremely dependent. And my memory is I was absolutely always frantic for these psychiatrist appointments because I couldn't do anything myself in between. I just had to wait till I could next see a doctor and they would say, okay, we need a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, or we can adjust this or we can adjust that. So it was very disempowering. And I think I went through a very low stage of disempowerment. And it's complicated because it's combined with if only the drugs make me better, if only the drugs could make me better. I think now that being with somebody very steady and authoritative who could have said to me, this is understandable, you're not mad, we don't really know exactly what's going on, acknowledge some of the limitations of our understanding of psychiatric health and say, you have it in your power. You have agency here. We can do things together and you can talk to someone, and just almost have talked me down from a very scary high cliff. And I'll never know if somebody had done that, whether I wouldn't have been so ill for so long. And I think that's the thing that gnaws away.
Because you have that doubt that it was actually the medication that was making you ill, not the depression. Is that right?
I just think I'll never know. I'll never know. I think of my small children. I find it quite heartbreaking that I missed so many years. I really did miss a lot of years with them, and I mind that a lot. And obviously, psychiatric medicine is really complicated. It's just not like breaking your leg. People say if you broke your leg, you'd get it fixed, and it's just not the same. I find that comparison really misleading. I think where I've got to now is a little bit more honesty from the medical profession about their lack of certainty. And I know we've talked about this. If somebody had said to me, look, we are going to try a bit of medication, but we're going to do it for the shortest time possible at the lowest possible dose. And we're going to try lots of other things as well. And you are going to be able to contribute. You are going to be able to make a difference. When I first started talking about what went wrong, I would always say, oh, well, I had this super stressful life and I worked in the newsroom. And it's true, situationally, it was stressful. I had lots of choices about how I could have responded to that stress. I didn't at that time know how to do all sorts of things. Say no, for example. No, I'm not available for the night shift. I've got two tiny children. No, I can't do that. I never occurred to me that I could line up with what I wanted to do. I think if I had my time again, I would have understood that there is something called psychological health, which we all have. And there are lots of really good things you can do to understand yourself, understand your personality, possibly understand the parenting you received, the context in which you grew up, the narratives you've told yourself about how you have to be in the world, and challenge them and learn how to think that it's okay to look after yourself and it's okay to say no to what self-evidently has made you into a kind of overflowing stress bucket. I think I was very frightened of being frightened and overwhelmed. And I think I would now think there's no feeling that can overwhelm me. I can use my feelings. What feels good? Does it feel good to take a nap? Does it feel good to see this person? Do I feel good about this doctor? But the idea of being selfish has got such a bad rap. But actually, what about the idea that if we look after ourselves, we're able to look after others?
It's a hard journey, isn't it? But I think also what's interesting is that you have such self-awareness now about this person who was a high achiever. And actually, looking back, it wasn't like you were a struggling single mum and had to be working in the Times newsroom. You were
No,
choosing
no,
it, and it was about validation, presumably.
completely. One of my big battles has been to acknowledge myself and my gifts, and nobody else needs to acknowledge me. And I'm still battling with that. I still want to tell you that this person's publishing my book, or I'm going on a podcast with Katinka.
That's a big one, Rachel. That's something to boast about. Come on.
Yeah, it's business of looking for yourself where you're not, the outward affirmation, the outward validation. So I just went around collecting up brand names. I went to St. Paul's Girls' School, so competitive London Girls' School. Then I went to Oxford. Then I worked at Vogue. I was one of the runners at the Times. I just always needed somebody else to say I was okay. And I never thought I was just okay just as I am. And I think that's where I'm trying to get to, that I'm okay just as I am. But at the same time, energetically, I'm actually quite calm. And it's okay. I don't need to always need this outward affirmation. And it never occurred to me it could just be a choice. Like, does that feel like a good thing to do? Maybe it does. Or maybe you just want to go and lie on the grass. But I still struggle with just lying on the grass because I feel my whole background, my sort of anxious striving previous personality is always about doing and let's get the next thing done. I'm still a bit in that treadmill. I'm not nearly as bad as I was.
The other question is that in all of this, did you actually think, actually, what really sparks joy? What do I really love?
Absolutely never. I try and do it with my children. I try and teaching them very different scripts, very different stories. And there's a lot about this sort of right wrong narrative. What's the right thing to do here? The right A level, the right uni, the right that, the right job. And I keep saying, maybe it's what feels right, what feels good to you. I'm not blaming anybody, but I don't think I ever asked myself that question.
So you get over crisis number one, you come off the medication.
Yeah, I do nothing. Maybe back to your chemical thing. I just think, okay, something went wrong. I go back to the Times. I work super hard. I multitask, try and prove myself, blah, 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 blah. And then the second episode starts in quite a similar way. Lack of sleep. I'm not pushing myself quite so hard in terms of work, but I'm pushing myself with children and parties. And the exact trigger this time round is, and this sounds so ridiculous, I'm embarrassed to share it with your listeners, is I decided to throw a big party
And this is how long after the first episode?
3 or 4 years after the first one.
Okay, so let's set the scene.
It's in West London, it's in our house, it's mistletoe, it's family and friends, it's probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 people. I actually get dressed up for this party and I've got all these screaming children and I'm not sleeping. And midway through the party, I literally collapsed in among the sort of mince pies in the kitchen. And all the same things start, the racing thoughts, the beating heart, the nausea, not be able to eat and drink. And I'm back where I was before. But I'm worse because I know this is awful and I'm doing it all over again. And this time I go straight onto medication and I'm doing the similar thing of medication, often being knocked out by it between doses of medication, and I'm just completely out of action.
And how long were you ill for?
On and off for a couple of years.
Wow. And what meds were you on this time round?
I was taking the citalopram, which was the next generation of antidepressants. I was taking sleeping pills. I was taking some anti-anxiety medication, diazepam. I was taking medication for all the side effects, so beta blockers to stop the heart racing. I was taking anti-nausea pills, and that was quite a long period. I switched psychiatrists because I wasn't really feeling I was making much progress. And the second psychiatrist said, okay, taking of the pills has become a big full-time job. Let's reduce your medication and just stick with the antidepressants, and we'll take them at night and that will help you sleep.
It so reminds me of the time when I was on medication. What's different is that I'm really clear that it was the medication that was causing the illness. Because as
Yeah,
soon as I came off it, I was fine. But hearing your experience, it just reminds me of I found it hard to get out of bed. I found it hard to read a book. It took away my empathy.
that's
Did
so
you have any of this?
totally. I remember I didn't read a book for maybe a year. I remember the first book I read was a novel, which I'd read many times before, called I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. And I remember being kind of punching the air thinking, oh my God, I can read a book. I mean, this is amazing. and I love to read. So that was a horrible thing. And the mornings were awful because my anxiety was off the charts in the mornings. I would wake up with this racing heart, terrified, and like literally stay under the covers because I was so frightened of the world. There was a moment when there was a line from Corinthians which did speak to me. And I do think when things are that dark, and it says, "My strength is made perfect in weakness, my grace is sufficient for thee." And that did spark in me, my strength is made perfect in weakness. And that was the first stirring of a positive will, because I thought maybe I'll come through stronger. Maybe this terrible experience, my strength will be made perfect in weakness. I do feel we're both so much stronger,
Yes,
certainly me. And
definitely.
you.
For both of us. So, how did you get out of the second episode?
Again, it was very slow. Gradually, the medication was tapering off, and little by little, I had my mum across the road. I had my husband, Sebastian, who was by my side. I found poetry that I found consoling, especially poems about real darkness, because it felt like I wasn't mad, I wasn't making it up. Other people have been there, which I think is really important. Maybe it's another reason we bond, is because we both know how absolutely terrifying that is. But also, we didn't make it up. It's so unfathomable what happened. I think that's why poetry spoke a lot to me. And then just a very slow sort of purpose, which was, what the hell happened? And what am I going to do about it? And what else could I do? And then that was when I began to build a toolkit and other approaches. And I got very interested in nutrition and mental health. I was interested in some of the psychological approaches. I started taking therapy really seriously. I began to spot some of the narratives that I had adhered to, which weren't helpful. I began to use different approaches, and that felt purposeful. And then this strong desire to connect with others and to hear them and hear their stories and think, could this be helpful or could that be helpful? So I teamed up with some of the mental health charities to try and work with some of their support groups. And I think what really motivates me is that if you're working with a bunch of people from who finding life really difficult, just a sense that there are things that people can do. A little spark of agency for them is fabulous when you see that coming alive in people.
Tell me about your decision to write your memoir.
I didn't really know what else to do, to be honest. And then I thought, okay, maybe I've got a story to tell. And people were just amazed because I, from a privileged background, and this sort of whole idea that you could have a privileged health and then bang, your whole life could be turned upside down. People seem interested in that. And it seemed interesting to people that it wasn't like I was suffering real social deprivation, nor was I a celebrity who might be crazy and artistic and up and down. I was this kind of middle category of sort of journalists, doctors, lawyers, bankers. But how could your life blow up? So that seemed like an interesting question. It was 7 years, and eventually an agent took me on, and eventually ended up a bestseller.
Fantastic.
And what did I think? I'm having a strong reaction. It's something about the pain of it all and sort of making the best of it. I don't know. I mean, I've made the best of it, but maybe it would it would have been nice for it not to have happened. There's an ambivalence there, I think.
Feels like that's bringing up sort of quite a lot of pain for you.
I've become much more interested in energies and somatics and feelings, and I'm much more in touch with my feelings. And there's something quite painful there, even though it was a success. And I went out with a book, and then I wrote other books, and I had this opportunity to talk to people. And I suppose I just feel it's a mess. It's a mess. How we're understanding psychological health and the lack of help available to people and the amount of suffering. It's just awful, really. I want to be a living example of recovery, and I want to share that. I feel that the NHS mental health system is not really delivering recovery. We've got 8.6 million people on antidepressants. There's still very little on offer for people who don't feel great. And it's still largely the biomedical model. And I don't blame GPs. They've got 8 minutes on the clock and they give medication. I feel that to understand the context of why people are unwell is a sort of really important message to get across. It's not what's the matter with you, it's what matters to you. So it's a really fundamental rethinking of people's psychological health. And I just wish there were more resources for people.
If you were the health minister, what would be in your manifesto for mental
I
health?
think we need to work much more on prevention. People get very unwell before they get any help. If we nip things in the bud much earlier, we'd have far fewer problems. I think we need to look at young people. So my next book is about young people and their mental health. I think there are really good psychological tools we could teach children in school, which might reduce their susceptibility to mental health problems. It's just a medical model, and there needs to be more resources and staffing for other options.
What do you think is wrong with antidepressants?
The problem is that a pill doesn't necessarily solve the problem. At best, it's dealing with symptoms in theory. But what it's not doing, and no one's pretending it's doing it, and doctors themselves are not pretending they're doing it, is not really dealing with any kind of underlying causes of what has led to the psychic drama in the first place. It's just something to sort of cope with symptoms. And I know a doctor would say, you've got to at least cope with the symptoms before you can get going on dealing with the underlying problems. Sure. But the real problem is people get put on medication and then they're left to it. Maybe I had to have this crisis to do a massive reset across so many different areas of me and my personality. But obviously, the problem is it's very difficult to replicate all the support that I had, the access to therapy, the access to nutritionists, access to lots of conversations. So I've been in a really privileged position to talk to so many people in this field. And not everybody gets that. So I suppose that's what gets me up in the morning, is to share some of this context, which I've been lucky enough to understand.
What is in your mental toolkit now? Because you've had these, however many years it is, medication free.
I think for simplicity, divide it between physical and psychological. Understand that there's a complete connection between the two. So if we're calm physically, we're mentally calm. If we're mentally calm, we're physically calm. The minute you feel tense, you're probably mentally tense. So on physical strategies, not rocket science, all the things you know, exercise. The big one was sleep, which was to realize that the lack of sleep is not so much as a problem as worrying about the lack of sleep. So it's stepping away from worrying about it. So I'm often up at night. The difference now is I'm not worrying about it, which would bring me to some of the psychological strategies, which are challenging some of the narratives. So taking away the sort of fear narrative, the idea that I will be overwhelmed, that I can't cope with my feelings, using some of the breathing exercises to stay calm and just allow things and to be with difficult feelings, whether that's sadness or anger. Just learn to strike when the iron's cold. Just understand fundamentally, I'd say that the key takeaway on my psychological approach is that for all of us, our main relationship is with ourselves. So you, Katinka, spend more time with your thoughts and feelings than with anybody else, and so do I. So I can find ways to manage and regulate my emotions and be with them and essentially not be frightened of them. And the same with my thinking styles. And I can spot it when I catastrophize. I can spot it when I read the future, mind read, all the ways of thinking that I had. If you look at the cognitive behavioral therapy 11 ways of thinking, I pretty much was doing every single one of them. Black and white thinking, catastrophizing, assuming I could read the future, and probably on the psychological ones, somehow being present centered. So being in the moment, allowing the moment, not being frightened of the moment. So one common idea is that depression is regret for the past, anxiety is worry about the future. So the present is a gift, present gift, present. Be here and now. And breathing is a great way to do that, because you can't breathe in the future or the past. You can only breathe now. And I suppose doing it all with compassion and kindness and just gentle on yourself. Just enjoying this time with you, Katinka. Just being with you right now. I'm feeling quite moved. It's special. We have a connection. We're both trying to figure this stuff out. That's a real privilege.
It is. And hearing your story again, I'm so struck by the similarities that my crisis, as we've talked about, it was sleepless nights and worrying about sleepless nights and worrying about, things that had never happened. In my instance, it was a divorce. The children were going to hate me, that we were going to be homeless, etc., etc. It was just a false narrative. And I suppose it's taken me a long time to realize that our thoughts are not reality. They're just not. You can have different, you can see those thoughts at any time. I suppose my question is that if you were to heliport yourself back to that time now with your wisdom, if you were to go back to that time, either of those crises, which were basically replications of this, it was the same overwhelm, anxiety. I've got to spin all of these plates.
Yeah.
With the knowledge that you have now, what would you say to your younger self?
I would have used the word allow. I love the word allow. Could you allow yourself just to take a break? Could you allow yourself to acknowledge all your gifts? I love this idea we all have gifts. I have plenty of gifts. You have plenty of gifts. And just acknowledge them and acknowledge your contribution. And you don't need to keep ticking boxes and supposedly winning more prizes to be okay.
Now, you are a mum of 5 kids.
Yeah.
You've written a book now about teenagers.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What's it called and what's it about?
Oh, thank you for asking. So it's called The Gift of Teenagers, Life Lessons They've Taught Me, brackets, and a few I tried to teach them. And I think it's really about what I have learned in the process of being a mother, but also what happened was about 5 years ago, in part of this big journey that you and I are on, I decided that it was really important to get to young people, because if you could get to young people, you could stop problems upstream, as it were. So the Mental Health Foundation says that 50% of mental health problems appear before the age of 14, which is amazingly young, and 75% of problems by the age of 25. So problems show quite early in people. I talked to lots of other people in that field, so adolescent psychologists and all the ologists, to try and think of ways, essentially, that parents could worry less and enjoy their teenagers more. Thus, its title, The Gift of Teenagers. So, how can we change this conversation and be a bit more positive?
What are the takeaways from the book?
If we want nice, calm, happy teenagers, we've got to get our own house in order first. So, your own emotional regulation, your own thinking styles. So, a lot of thinking styles as parents are quite exaggerated forms of these sort of negative thinking styles. So, like catastrophizing. So, if you don't hear from your teenager, you think they've been abducted and taken off into slavery, and those sort of panicky feelings one has as a parent. I think my takeaways are to look at your own responses and how we can learn to manage them. And the book's really all about relationships. So it's your relationship with yourself as a parent, and then your relationship with your teenager, and what are good ways to nourish and nurture that relationship. And I think if I had to stress one thing, is to take away the negative narrative that there's a problem, and actually to think this is an opportunity. And even things which are really difficult, and I'm not saying they're not very difficult. I've had my most painful experiences in life have been to do with bringing up teenagers, because there can be incredibly painful moments. But what I would say is that these can also be the moments of most growth. I'll give you one example. One issue I had was trying to get teenagers to sit down at table and having these family meals together
Without their phones.
without their phones, which is a big topic in the book. And I think the learning for me was to step away at trying to force things and force outcomes. So it's not to say as I didn't have a desire for them to join me at the table. I did. I'd cooked a nice meal and I wanted them to join. So it's about this idea of honoring your desire, being with that feeling, allowing it, acknowledging a bit of sadness, but also not being attached to outcomes. So I would say it's dinner time. And I would genuinely and energetically and somatically and emotionally and psychologically be in a place where it was okay if they didn't come to meals. And of course, the less I tried to force them to come to meals, the more likely it was that they joined me at meals. So it's full of ways of how you do that, how you can be with feelings, how you can change stories in your head to make your life with teenagers easier and more fun.
Which I suppose is a life lesson as well, isn't it? Because the more we try to control other people, it causes such suffering because we're just clearly not in control of so much.
Absolutely. And I think there's a nice line I use, which something I've tried a lot and it seems to work really well with parents, is this idea of turn control into curiosity, but also being alongside them, but also not trying to rescue them, that they're not victims. I feel that the conversation around young people's mental health has just become much too negative.
This is what I wanted to come on to. This is obviously something that must be in the forefront of your consciousness. having written the book and being a mum of 5, which is a surge in mental health diagnosis for teenagers, it's skyrocketing, isn't it? If it's not ADHD, it's anxiety, it's depression, there's a huge surge in medicalizing and in medication. What's your view on that?
What I'm very conscious of is that diagnosis puts you in a box and you can get fixed in this diagnosis. And actually, if you look at the work of somebody like Sarah Jane Blakemore, who's a wonderful neuroscientist who looks at young people and understanding the adolescent brain, the overwhelming message is it's a time of huge change. To put someone in a box and give them a diagnosis for life may be not allowing the possibility of change, which is going to be happening, and also narrowing their identity and their understanding of themselves and what may be possible for them. And maybe there's nothing wrong here. Maybe situationally things can be stressful, but hey, there are ways you can handle it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you need to go down the medication route. And there's a lot of concern, even in the medical profession, the psychiatric profession, about how little we know about antidepressants in teenagers.
And we do know that they carry serious side effects.
Yeah, I think any doctor listening would agree that if we could find other approaches, that would be better. So I suppose that's what my book's trying to do, is to say, let's not panic. There may be some answers here. There may be other things you can do, other approaches you can take.
Rachel's new book, The Gift of Teenagers, Life Lessons They've Taught Me, it's now available for pre-order. Is that right?
Yes, it's coming out with Hachette next May, and it is now up on Amazon. I've got a little bit of some of my old stuff coming up, but as I talk to you, is it good enough? Is it okay? Have I really got things to say? But I feel really good that I might be able to help a few people.
And I'm sure that you will.
Oh, thank you.
As a life coach, I like to tell people that there's a gift in every circumstance. And it's the title of your book as well, The Gift of Teenagers.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, looking back, what was the gift in your mental health crises?
The real gift, and I'm feeling a little bit emotional, and it does link to what I'm now working on, is that it's made me into a different kind of parent. I'd like to think I've stopped the rot for the next generation in terms of thinking about raising young people in a really different way, about what matters, about giving them the tools to look after themselves, to understand their emotions, to understand their thinking styles, to be at ease with who they are, to feel good enough. All these things, I think that I would never embarked on that if I hadn't been unwell. So in a way, for me, that's the greatest gift, is that, yes, I went down, as it were, but what I'm hoping is that in my role as a mother, my own children have a very different kind of understanding of good psychological health.
And what could be a better gift than that?
Actually, you just asking me, I hadn't really thought, but in fact, hallelujah. I punched the skies. I'm going a little bit shaky, actually. I don't, you can't probably see, but I've got goosebumps all here and I'm going slightly shaky. Being excited and being nervous are the same feeling. Yeah, bloody hell. Maybe that's what it was all about.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And a reminder that Rachel's new book, The Gift of Teenagers, Life Lessons They've Taught Me, is now available on Amazon for pre-order. So that's all from me, Katinka Blackford Newman, mental fitness life coach, author, health journalist, and founder of antidepressantrisks.org. If you wish to contact me, you can do so at www.kbnlifecoaching.co.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katinka. That was wonderful.
Okay.